Okay, well, we can go ahead and begin. So, my name is Bob Lawrence, and I am not a historian, and I am not an architecture person. I am this guy's grandson. So that's what we're going to talk about today from my perspective. So and Nancy and I are going to share responsibilities here because she's the expert on Richland. I am not. So I can tell you basically, and maybe if you saw in the promotional material about this, my sister was supposed to have been here today as well. She is on her way back from Europe, so she's not here. So I'm carrying the gauntlet for both of us. So this is a slideshow that we put together last year with the Spokane Preservation Advocates, and that's a group that they preserve architecture basically in Spokane. Basically because of this building had been the Rookery building in Spokane. It no longer exists, and its downfall was the beginning of the Spokane Preservation Advocates. We're pretty informal here, so if you have questions, go ahead and just raise your hand. If I can answer it, I will. If I can't, tough luck. We have yes?
What happened to that building? Somebody tore it down?
This building, yes, this is called the Rookery building. It was the second iteration of the Rookery building in Spokane. And it was torn down for a parking lot.
Of course.
Yes. And I'm sorry I didn't repeat the question. I'm going to try and do that. So the question was, what happened to this building? And maybe you figured that out. So the first part of this presentation is the selected works of G.A. Pehrson. And I grew up knowing his name as Pehrson, but it's actually Pehrson. As you'll find out, he is from Sweden, came over to the U.S. And if you really want to say it properly in Sweden, you'd say Pehrson. I'm going to go with Pehrson, okay? Gustav Albin Pehrson. And so this is a quick rundown of some of his work. This is Spokane in 1926, as you can see. And he arrived in Spokane about 1906, and we'll get more into how he got there. So the Davenport Hotel, the historic Davenport Hotel, if you've heard of that. So Davenport Hotel, Cutter and Malmgren was the architectural firm that hired Gustav to work for them basically on the historic Davenport. Louis Davenport, after which the Davenport Hotel is named, he hired Gustav, my grandfather, to do his house here. And down here, architect G. Albin Pehrson. We'll talk more about their relationship, which was very good. This is the Chancery building as designed by Kirtland Cutter, for sure. And that no longer exists, but it was replaced by this Chancery building, which was designed by Gustav Albin Pehrson. Now, if you know architecture, you probably know that, an architectural firm can have fleets of architects doing the work. And the architect who owns the firm gets the credit, and that happens still today. And that definitely was happening with Kirtland Cutter, his organization back then. So this iteration was a Pehrson design. It is on its last legs. If you know Spokane at all, it's on Riverside, just west of Monroe. And it is in really bad shape. It needs lots of, bringing back to code and tender loving care, there's kind of nobody around to pay for that. I've heard it would cost tens of thousands of dollars just to bring the elevator back up to code. And this doesn't even exist anymore, so the Finley Studebaker garage, but you can see, some of the architectural flair that happens in these buildings. Now this building started as the Eldridge Buick building. It does still exist, and on the right here is how it looks today. And this down here is a really great coffee shop. My wife and I go there for coffee a few times a month. And I tell them my grandfather designed it, and they're just say, who cares? Anyway, the Chronicle building it came through Cutter's firm, but Cutter took on the job and immediately gave it to Gustav, my grandfather. It's really hard in Spokane to convince some people that somebody other than Cutter did everything in Spokane. And so that's kind of my game these days, is to, bring up the name of my grandfather, Pehrson, and says, well, no, he really did that. And of course, that's all peanuts compared to Richland, but I should just move to Richland. I'll blow through these. These are some of the nice, residential homes that were done by Pehrson. Well, the Paulson Medical Dental Building, there's a better picture of that coming up, so that'll help you identify it. The Women's Club on West Spokane. The Prius House, another residential. Roosevelt Apartments, those are on the near South Hill, near Spokane. So these are just quick glimpses of some of the, again, the Roosevelt Apartments. Now the Greek church here on the far right, I'm trying to point at it, Pehrson did not do that, he did this building. So it's the kind of the annex building, or whatever the name would be. This again is the Rookery building, that's the one that got torn down for a parking lot. And this house, if you know Spokane at all, there's Rockwood Boulevard. And as you're heading downtown from the South Hill, along there's a curve, and that's where this is. And the Spanish design went into this one. I've got some better pictures coming up. Stevens County Courthouse in Stevens County. Now this house, the Kirk Thompson House, there was a sort of a trend at this time in 1936 to use concrete to build buildings, to make buildings out of concrete. And so this is, Pehrson one of his big ones of that. And the Centennial Flour Mill, just east of Spokane, if you're on I-90, you will see this north of I-90. And this is a big deal. The trains would go underneath, and the grain and all that would get loaded into them, and that's what that's about. Hotel Florence, Montana. Not Florence, Montana, Missoula, Montana. And you notice the date on here, 1942. Boink. This is the house up in which I grew. So the notes will come back. Okay, so that's my house. And notice the date on that one, 1946. So in Spokane, there's sort of a dearth of Pehrson activity between 1942 and 1946. What was going on? Okay, enough said. And Pearson's own house, which is a block away from where I grew up. And these are people who we can thank for a lot of those images. Okay, so this is where I come in. This is me in the center, my sister Betsy, who's on her way back from Europe, and the man himself, Gustav Pehrson. Christmas morning. We called him Baba. I'm not sure why. But I am one of 4 siblings. I'm sibling number 3. So we had older brother, older sister, and then nine years later came along me, and then my younger sister. So these are the older ones. And this is taken in Hayden Lake, Idaho. So Gustav had a couple of different lake places. When he landed in the area, Newman Lake, which is just east of Spokane, and like just south of Mount Spokane. So he started there. There was a Swedish community there. And then he moved on to Hayden Lake. And here we have, well, that's me there. And Baba always just doted over all of us. So, I would always climb on his lap and have me read, the same kids' books over and over again, and he loved it. And then this is my older sister, Helen. And this is Bess Pehrson, Gustav's wife, and we called her Bees. So you had Bees and Baba. I think my older brother, when he was little, came up with those names. My other grandmother's named Bobo. And I'm Bob. So this is the dock that had been at Hayden Lake. One thing about Pehrson is that, the lake place was not a place to relax. It was a place to work. He just had that work ethic where he wanted to do everything and do it the best that he could. At one point, my older brother got to do a paint job with Pehrson, and that was my older brother's lesson, is that whatever job you do it the best you can. And Pehrson, this is the same lake place at Hayden Lake. There's a little creek here that goes across the property, so he built this. And that's where he would sit, in the late afternoon when it's hot. He had a glass there, and he just, drink the water straight from the creek. So he did relax a little bit. That's my older brother and Pehrson. And that's sort of a shot of the house. So there's the main house there, and there's a second house there. That's where Baba and Bees lived, where they slept, so they can get away from us. Okay, so who is this guy Pehrson? He was born in Sweden near Karlstad. So if I put the pointer up here, you can see where the pointer is. And if I go over here, this section, well, here is Stockholm. And over here you have Karlstad. And actually, it's a little community called Svatoa. Anybody know what that means? It means Black Creek. So Svatoa. Anyway, Pehrson was one of 8 children, and he was, I think, number 7. He had a younger brother named Olaf Rudolf, and he went by Roy. And so Pearson's father worked at a lumber mill in support of the Iron Age. And his father was named Per Eriksson, and so Pehrson was Per's son, so his last name became Pehrson. And so Gustav and Olaf traveled from their hometown down to Göteborg, and they got on the boat and headed to England and eventually to the U.S. And this yellow house is here because another brother of Pearson's is actually also a designer and builder, and he did this house, and this is in Stockholm. And my wife and I got to go to Stockholm 6 years ago, so I took that picture myself. That house is still there. This is the boat that Olaf and Rudolf came over on. I'm sorry, Gustav and Olaf. This is the Etruria. And this is an article from a Swedish magazine about my grandfather. So basically, grandfather came from Sweden, and he lit in Chicago. And this is a part of a year-long, internship, experience to come over and study and experience work in America. And in his travels brought him to Spokane and to California. And in Spokane, that's where he experienced Newman Lake. And he also actually did some work for Kirtland Cutter and that organization. And then he returned to Chicago, and then he returned to Sweden. He was going to just spend the rest of his life working in Sweden. But by the time he had spent a year in the U.S. and just this land of opportunity and newness and great ideas, he got back to his home country, and it was just so stilted in tradition that he couldn't take it. So he came back to Chicago and then came back to Spokane. He was hired by Kirtland Cutter to work on the Davenport Hotel, the historic Davenport Hotel. Again, Pehrson got to Spokane for real about 1906. And again, he met his wife at Newman Lake, and they had one daughter who is my mother, and this is Betty Pehrson Lawrence. She was older when I knew her. Now, here is an early drawing of the historic Davenport Hotel. And if you know the historic Davenport Hotel, you can see the great towers, and some of the frou-frou didn't make it into the final version. And what I am up against in Spokane is, like I say, telling people that no, Kirtland Cutter didn't do everything. I mean, he did a lot. And he was a licensed architect, but he wasn't a trained architect. He was more of an artist and creator. So he would come up with these great ideas, and then other people would, take it from there. But in some cases, some of the people did more. So this slide is here because this is it's a shop drawing for the Davenport Hotel and revised by GAP. So this document and other documents show Pearson's signature where the architect's signature would be. This again is for the Davenport Hotel, the historic Davenport. This is Pearson's registration card for the draft, and so it shows a person who would always know your address. So it's L.M. Davenport of the Davenport Hotel in Spokane. So Louis Davenport. And at that time, the Davenport Hotel is all you would have to put on the letter to, when you address the letter, Davenport Hotel, Spokane, Washington. And these are pictures of the Davenport. I think my wife and I took most of these pictures. So showing a lot of the architectural flair. And this picture shows Pehrson right here. This is a dinner at the Davenport Hotel. And I don't know who the other men are except for this man. He's my father. So this is Pehrson when he was younger than I knew him. I was born in the year that Pehrson turned 75. And then so that was 1955, and he died in 1968, so I was about 13 when he died. So I got to know him, pretty well for that short time. These are quickly some of the other buildings. This is the Spokane Club in Spokane. And this is the Chronicle building, which is another building that Cutter's firm took on and immediately handed off to Pehrson. And I love this ad. Your lady clients or customers will be favorably impressed by your offices in the new Chronicle building. Now, the Chronicle building is still there, and if you make it to Spokane, you should check it out. The first floor now, has some, like a coffee shop and a brewery and things like that, and a lot of offices. And actually, the Chronicle, was for the Chronicle newspaper, which that newspaper is not there anymore. So this is an early, drawing put in the newspaper. This is how the Chronicle building looks now. And up here you have printers' gargoyles, and anybody know what those are? They are for good luck, right? Because no newspaper, printing agency can be without these. And this is pretty much how they look from the street. It'd be nice to see them closer. Okay. So one thing about the Chronicle building now, it's sort of an event center as well as other things. And so you can get onto the roof and see the printers' gargoyles from behind. And this is my wife, Lynette, over here. She's taking a selfie with the printer's gargoyle. I had to walk away and turn away. I couldn't even watch. I thought her phone is for sure going to go down to the street. But me of little faith. And this is one of the hallways in the main floor of the Chronicle building. And this is here because these lanterns were designed in part by Pehrson. And so this is a photo I was able to take. And then I should mention, my grandmother, when she passed away, and the rest of the family was going in, cleaning up her stuff. Well, she had a big box of newspaper articles from the beginning about Pehrson. And we have given those, the family donated those to the Historical Society in Spokane, but each of us siblings got a copy, it's a book, showing these. And so I have that book, in fact I have it here, but I also have been to the Historical Society, so I've seen some of the original newspaper clippings. So kind of on my wish list now is to get over there and figure out which ones I need to get good copies of. So, these were made in 1980s, it's just a photocopy. Anyway, this is the Chancery building that I mentioned earlier that is on its last legs probably because it is just so far gone. It would be way too expensive to bring it back and do anything with it. It started life as the Great Northern Life building, and this is the same building, a newspaper article about it, and this is a picture of it in the wintertime. Okay, so this is one of the ads that Pehrson put out. When you build, consult an architect, regardless of the size of the building or the extent of the alterations, you need an architect. He will save you many times his fee or her fee by avoiding costly errors and wasted effort. And here is where he claims credit for the Davenport Hotel. The Chronicle building I don't know about that. Paulson, and that is a store, Culbertson's, and then some of the homes. And now we get into the Paulson Medical Dental Building, and this still exists in Spokane. It's one of the tallest buildings downtown, and that stair step top of it is, if you see it, then you'll know, okay, that's the Paulson. There's a Paulson building also downtown, but this is the Paulson Medical Center, so there are two Paulsons. And just real quick, some of the newspaper coverage of that. This is the top, the penthouse of the Paulson building, and we were able to, it's now an event center as well. And my sister and I were able to visit it one day and just take some snaps. And it was in the winter time, so this is the view from the penthouse. You can pretty much, see to Canada. That's my sister. And again, the Centennial Mills, just east of Spokane. And again, this is the house that I grew up in. Featured in House Beautiful magazine. Take a look at this. This is the living room. In fact, this is where my wife and I got married, in this room. But the open beams and the vaulted ceiling. More of the magazine article, the kitchen and the breakfast nook. Horrible picture. This is the picture of that house on Rockwood Boulevard. This is the living room in that house on Rockwood Boulevard, so it's got the same type of ceiling. The Spokane Preservation Advocates had an event there, so I got to go there and take a few pictures there. They have a swimming pool. This is the view from that house looking north, and if you look through the trees there's that Centennial Mills building. Can't get rid of that. And now is where we start to talk about what happened between 1942 and 1946. So do you want to just hop over to yours now, or?
Sure. Are you finished with yours?
I think so. Well,
okay.
Let's go real quickly. This is a presentation I did in Spokane, so Richland kind of got short shrift in that one, but this shows that Pehrson was the guy for Hanford. What's that a picture of?
Probably the hospital.
Hospital?
Wouldn't that be your guess? Yes.
Okay.
Hospital, or it could have been the high school, and that could be the ditch up on Thayer behind it.
Okay, could have been the hospital or the high school.
I think hospital.
We say hospital.
Yeah. That's hospital. That's
Is this accurate?
prefab, but he didn't design the prefab.
Okay, so skip that one. I don't know about,
An F house and an A house.
okay, F house and an A house we have here.
We're looking at these. Yep.
Yeah. And this is just a promotional picture of my grandfather with a model, I guess, an actress, Okay, that's that.
Now you get me to mine. So one of the things I think probably for any architectural project that happens is you have a client who might have a site already and has some idea of a house, and along in the process you might have a few changes. Someone gives you a design, you say, oh, I want to move this. And that can be really time-consuming. Now do that whole process for a village, okay? Because that's what we're talking about. Often when people talk about the Manhattan Project as a whole, it's really quite stunning how quickly they could go from theoretical work to producing a bomb in fairly short time. For the plutonium project here in Richland, DuPont, who was in charge of it, had a 5-year contract, and they did it in 3. And by the way, a government CPA auditor, as a result, gave them 2/3 of their dollar fee. And apparently a local Kiwanis club sent them the other 35 cents. But what happened, the process of what happened and how quickly Richland was created, to me is really phenomenal. You have Colonel Frank Mathias, who is works with, how many of you have seen Oppenheimer? Okay, so Leslie Groves. He is the person in charge of the whole Manhattan Project, and he sends his assistant, Frank Mathias, to find a place in the West Coast for the plutonium pile project. They check out places in California, he flies over here at the end of December, and writes back to Groves, this is it, because they needed cold water, they needed space, they needed railroad, but not too much railroad, they wanted not many people. You could just see him clicking off the information so that in the beginning of January, Groves comes out also, looks at it, they make a firm decision for Richland. In February, a federal judge using the War Powers Act sends eviction notices to about 1,500 people in Hanford, White Bluffs, Richland, and spaces in between, all of which are like, huh, what happened? And then in the beginning of March, they talk about, well, we're going to have the people who are building the reactor are going to live at the north, out by Hanford. And you hear about the Hanford camp and the 50,000 people. But once they build it, the people who are going to operate the reactors are going to live away from the reactor, at least 10 miles, and in fact, they end up with further because the geography they chose allows that. But the Richland is built for the operators, and the first thing they want is this is what Richland looked like. This is a 1930s aerial view of a farming community that is about to be changed. The original statement in Mathias's diary, before they talk to anyone, is they think they're going to be able to use it, I love it, for those families that need to be, people who need to be under control. But, and of course, that's the story of Richland, because until Richland becomes an independent city in 1958, you cannot live here unless you work on the Hanford site. So, under control. But they didn't think that everyone who worked on it would need to be in Richland until they realized that the neighboring towns didn't have any extra housing. They were very full up with other kind of war work. So the rules change. This is the first thing. So they talk actually to a couple of architects, and then they end up talking to, Pehrson is one of them, and initially he's like, I have an office of 3 people. And then within a week, he's called to another meeting, and clearly in that time, he has done some work, but this is now what they're talking about. Suddenly it's gone from only those who have to be kept under control to 6,500, possible expansion to 12,000. Now, think about that in terms of what it means that you're going to have to do. Houses, you're going to have to do utilities. You don't know the numbers? This is, to me, where Pehrson really shows what he could do. He didn't build an army town, okay? We don't have just simple rows of identical houses. Mathias says, Pehrson comes in, he can put work immediately, and better yet, his bid is cheaper, okay? That goes a long way, because at the upper levels, at Groves level, he's really worried that someday he's going to be called in front of Congress to say, how did you spend all these millions of money in secret? And if it doesn't work. So he's got to do this, and what he does is he has to work with what he's got. So the first problem is that the requirement, because they're worried about flooding, is that no houses can be built below 360 feet above sea level. As a result, Richland is built in 3 sections. You have a section over here by the river. You have what they call the south section over here. And you have what they call the northwest section, which initially comes along this line here, Thayer, and a little bit right down here. And then there were originally going to be apartments somewhere in here. There are the dorms. You can't see where the dorms are. There are dorms for single people. The plan is for apartments, but the Army sees a model of prefabricated houses from Tennessee Valley Authority. They order a couple, look at these 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom houses, and decide, yeah, we can do these. They design a 3-bedroom, and they tell Pehrson, find a place for them. So even though he really wanted to mix the kinds of houses up together, he has to suddenly put 1,300 prefabs someplace. So he puts them in this section initially, and they add another 500 of them, and they come up in this area. But he's always having to work with the plans changing. You know, he didn't design the prefabs, but find a nice place for them. And if you look through the prefabs, you'll see he used the same kind of attitude in placing them. They're angled, they're mixed up, some of them are in sort of semicircles. He's trying still, no matter where he does it, to make these houses, to make attractive neighborhoods. And these quotes are from some things he said about his, how he did the work. And they're always trying to make a place where people want to live. So some of you have been on the walks that Teresa Knirk and I do, and one of the things I always say is any project can have good, fast, cheap, 2 out of 3. So if you think about this one, the government wants fast and cheap. DuPont, for its workers, would like good but fast, and Pehrson is there trying to juggle this. And all through his report he had to do, he did in November of 1943, so just a few months after he started, he talks about, well, what they would like to have done. And Matthias in his diary refers to this also. Could we do porches? No. Porches, if you can do a porch for 2/3 of what you quoted, you could have a porch. All right, porches go out. Fireplaces, nope, fireplaces go out. Everything is always a tug of war on what you would like to do and what the money will let you do. The houses end up having to be built within budget, and you've got to build a lot of them, thousands of them, for this ever-increasing number of workers. But if you're familiar, how many of you live in an alphabet house? Okay, so here we are, 80 years later, our houses are still sturdy, and he was careful about it. These are houses that have closets. They have ample closets for the time, certainly. They were built originally with coal furnaces. Coal was delivered into the basement, and because it had coal, the houses were at least 30 feet apart because they worried about sparks coming out of a chimney and causing a fire. The prefabs don't get that far apart because they have electrical heat, so they can be squished together a bit more. He talks also about using the topography. Now, most of us looking at Richland tend to say, oh, it's flat. You will think it's less flat when you're walking on it and it's icy, or as my husband discovered when he had surgery and he had a boot on his foot, that there is a surprising number of slightly rolling hills around town that he said work with the topography. Don't flatten it all out. And the end result is that he created a very attractive city. So what are the houses? So we're going to look first at the wartime houses that he designed. So over here we have an A house, and there were about 402 units, I can't remember exactly, of these, and that meant 804 houses, units, because it was a duplex, side-by-side, 3-bedroom with a basement. In a lot of cases, they only dug out 40% of the basements. They didn't build out full basements. And I've seen lots of people who grew up here saying, yeah, but what my father did was bucket by bucket. He emptied it out to get larger space in the basement. But the A house is then the B house, the more B houses than anything else. This is a 2-bedroom duplex, side by side. Because these were for ordinary workers, there are more of those than anything else. Then you get into, there were going to be so ordinary workers get those. Upper management are going to get either a D, an E, or a G. The D and the G are 4 bedrooms, and the E, there were only 8 of each of those, and they're scattered around town. There's a G on the river. If you walk along the river, there's a G that was taken down to the studs, and it looks like someone just sort of blew it up. It was twice as large, but still gabled. That was a G originally. And then an E house also was upper management. Middle management, supervisors, would have been in either an F or an H house, 3-bedroom houses. And in talking about these houses, it's interesting to read his comments. Having seen the kind of detail that he put into the houses in Spokane, obviously he was capable of some pretty fabulous houses. Here he does things, he's concerned, he writes about the F house, that it's a very traditional federal, but they had to, because of the construction methods, raise it up. It's not on grade, and it was going to be too tall, so that's why they put the gables in with the slant roof. He's always thinking about what are the optics of what he's producing. It's just fascinating to read his comments. The H house, the second one from the right, is a nice sort of bungalow-style house. In the first pages of the report he did in November of 1943, he writes that it's almost apologetic. He writes along the lines of, you'll note that we did not do anything innovative here. And it's almost apologetic, when you think of the other works he did, but we had to make sure that anything we did, that we could not use new construction methods because the workers were going to come from all places across the country, and they had to know how to do it. The carpenter from Oklahoma and the carpenter from Tennessee had to know how to build the house in Washington. But he's almost apologetic for not doing bigger, better, spiffier. He doesn't use those terms, but you almost sense that in it. And he does say, and that there were always compromises that had to be made. And I am sure that there were compromises being made all the time. What do you do when you're trying to build and you've got to get moving faster and keep it going? And then one of the things that they had a problem with is they thought they knew how many workers they were going to need. That's that 6,000, or the original 4,000, they say, and a week later it's up to 6,500. Pretty soon it's up to 7,000. By July of 1945, it was almost 15,000. So, well, when you're building that, he's not only building the houses, he's also trying to figure out, well, how many shoe stores do you need? How many stores do you need? How many of this can you need? What can they buy other places in, the next town over? There's a description at one point where they're trying to, with the laundry, that initially you were going to drop your stuff off, your laundry off, if you had to, I guess it needed dry cleaning or more significant, and you would pick it up, but the laundry was going up to Yakima to be done. And I've seen listings of something called the Sage Sentinel, which is something workers looked at, sort of daily newspaper, which said, it may take you 3 weeks to get your laundry. Whoops. The result was that they then added the laundry we now have on Gillespie. And so clearly they needed something local that was going to do more. What about schools? Well, he didn't want children crossing major streets. So he's got an original school, which was down roughly where Lewis and Clark is now. That was the Richland Grammar School. So they expand on that. They closed the high school, which was in the same area. April, those graduates were saying, you're done, bye. And then they had added 2 more schools. The first Sacagawea was at the corner of Williams and Stevens, which is now the big green space next to CUP Church. And then the third school was Jefferson. And then they add those 1,300 to 1,800 prefabs, and they need another school. And in 1945, they added Marcus Whitman. But talk about a moving target. I mean, I can just imagine, him coming home, Baba coming home to his wife and saying, they added another how many people? This is how many houses they want now. What do you do? But the miracle is that he did it. I mean, to me, it's just phenomenal how he produced the city that worked. Now, after 1945, August, the bomb is dropped. We're right about at the anniversary. And the people are really worried. What's going to happen next? Cold War breaks out. They decide they need more reactors. They need more people. They need more housing. As people talk today about Richland having a housing shortage, Richland has always had a housing shortage. So then they have additions to the houses. And the funny thing is that right after the war, Matthias sold 500 of the prefabs. Okay, we're done with those. And then they, oh, no, we need more. So they have what they call the pre-cuts, and they were brought in, and they were put on the same spaces, fewer than 500, I think 300 something. I'd have to look up the numbers. U's and V's, these are not Pehrson designs, but they're put where prefabs had been because you already had utilities. But they decided to do another round of building, and the next round of building are the houses that were built. Again, they called Pehrson back to do the designs. And for these, we have, I'm just going to go across. The far one is an M house, 2-bedroom, and there are about 25 of those. And then you have a Q house and an R house. These are the pictures from one of these books that I have they're not as crisp as I would like. Q you can tell them apart because the Q has 1-bedroom window in that front outcropping. The R has 2. And then they did the 19 S houses, which are 4-bedroom, really fabulous, top of the line. And apologies, when I talked about the houses, I didn't mention the L on the previous slide. The L here on the end is because more people came with big families. And the L house, 44 of them, is the only model that didn't connect with your job category. That was how big was your family. But you can imagine that 44 didn't begin to cover the problems. So back there, here we are at the post-war houses. And so these are primarily closer to the river. And they are maybe from about Johnston over, you start to, let's say from Stevens over towards the river, there are some of these houses. These were more for management, these houses, and really considered the prime houses at the time. People have sometimes asked us on our walks, what about, sometimes they have what we call a sunroom at the end of it, a sun porch. Sometimes they're wood, sometimes they're made of masonry blocks. And a report we were reading recently said they were starting with masonry and they couldn't get enough masons. So, okay, got to do some of this with stick building. So no matter when they were doing this, they're always dealing with availability of materials and having to make changes based on what's happening. We thought we could build this house this way. They talked in one place about putting only half basements in some of the Qs and Rs. And after they started doing it, the contractor said, it's cheaper to just do the whole thing instead of having to shore it up. Okay, let's make that change. So you can imagine the headaches. That's all I can think of. But to be able to pull it off, to me, is phenomenal. That sort of concludes what I have to say about it. I think as far as the presentation, what he did, he is incredible. It was interesting to hear that he'd done so much in Spokane, kind of funny because Bob knew less about his Richland. I knew nothing about his Spokane. Okay, let's put it all together. So that's what we've got. We'll open up for lots of questions in a second, but I want to just make one thing. Teresa, where are you, Teresa? About 4 years ago, Teresa sent a letter to the Richland Parks and Rec Commission saying, we have nothing named for Pehrson. Let's rename, and she had suggested Stevens Park for him. And over time, talking, and COVID came, nothing happened. The idea morphed into, let's name the Urban Greenbelt Trail for Pehrson. And we've done some presentations to the commission. This Thursday, Richland Parks and Rec Commission is going to vote on whether or not they will recommend to City Council that we should name the Urban Greenbelt Trail for Pehrson. And I would ask any of you who are willing to support us on this to let Parks and Rec Commission know that, because we would really, at 6 o'clock in City Council chambers, we would love to have people say, yes, we think this is an important idea. I think we have things named for Leslie Groves. We have statues on the library grounds for Matthias. Leona Wood Marshall Libby, who is one of the women involved in the Manhattan Project here. She's one of the scientists here. We have a school for her. We need something named for Pehrson. And the path goes through the area he developed. We think it would be great. So thank you.